My name is Toby. I don't know quite what I think about God, whether he exists, what powers he may have, or if he should be important to me. I was brought up to believe he should. That's what my family told me. But the apathy of society towards religion suggested I shouldn't worry too much about it. I don't think I'm alone in my confusion or alienation from religion and the church. Statistically, fewer people attend church than ever before. Never before have so many people identified as not believing in God. But what has caused this shift, particularly among young people? What issues have most influenced this change, and what is the church doing to counter it? Over the last few months, I have attempted to answer these questions, accompanied by my friend John. I have spoken to youth workers, religious leaders, atheists, and academics. Their insights have been both varied and fascinating. The first time a child encounters religious teachings is often during their upbringing. The Reverend Nicky Gumbel grew up in a household where religion wasn't deemed a priority. In 1990, he took over the running of the Alpha Course, an evangelistic program designed to introduce the basics of the Christian faith in a way that is accessible and relevant. Today, the Alpha Course is practiced in 169 countries and has been attended by over 22 million people. Nicky has become a globally recognised Christian leader, but that wasn't always the case.
I became an atheist when I was a teenager, and I was quite sort of argumentative. I just sort of worked, that was the conclusion I came to. So that was how I was when I started at university. But what changed me was reading the New Testament. I'd read the New Testament at school with sort of, you know, RE lessons and things, but it didn't really mean anything to me. But then I read it just from cover to cover, really, and in a different kind of way. And it really came alive. And it was as if I really encountered Jesus in that reading. And then you know, in that moment of saying yes, I experienced something that was so deeply satisfying, whereas things in life before, nothing had quite done that. Touch the sort of deep inner hunger.
Alam Shahar is a physics teacher in London. He also works as a filmmaker, writer, and science communicator. He was born in Bangladesh, but grew up in Elephant and Castle in London. His book, The Young Atheist's Handbook, inspired me to talk with him, and he agreed to meet us at his school. Alam grew up in a Muslim community, but now describes himself as an atheist, being a trustee of the British Humanist Association. What was it that made you convert from Islam to atheism?
It's hard to say that I converted from Islam to atheism, because I don't think there was kind of one massive decision to do so. It wasn't like I woke up one morning and said, oh, I'm not a Muslim anymore. It was a much more gradual process of coming to realise that I didn't really believe in the religion that my parents had brought me up in. The answers about things like how the world worked, what it all meant, that I was given from religious sources, from the Imam or my parents or whatever, just didn't make sense to me. I suspect that for an awful lot of people who are brought up in religious families, that what turns them away from religion is the same thing that turned me away from my religion, which is a personal sense that this stuff just doesn't make sense. I felt ultimately it was dishonest to pretend, and I didn't feel I had compelling reasons to remain a Muslim. I felt it was dishonest to describe myself as a Muslim, because I wasn't one in any sense of the word.
You can't control your children's beliefs. So I suppose the question is, how much sort of pressure do you put on your children when they're growing up? I mean, obviously there's a practicality about the fact that if you're going to church on Sunday and the children are very small, there's just no option. But as soon as they get to decide, they've got to decide. I think in the old days people were perhaps a bit more directional in terms of their children. I think now it's more sort of fashionable to give people much more freedom about how they choose and what they do. And I think also being really honest with your children is important. Being honest about your doubts, being honest about problems that there are with faith, not sort of kidding them that there are no issues.
As a child grows up, home life is not the only influential factor in deciding whether they hold a faith. The school environment must also be considered, where any explicit or inferred peer pressure may influence the beliefs of young people. Since coming to the UK from the US a few years ago, Skye Cady has worked closely with young people at his church, All Saints Weston in Bath, where we met for a discussion. Skye has a Master's in Theology and a degree in Bible Studies. He also makes frequent school visits, as well as organising groups to attend Christian festivals. This gives him a deep insight into the views of young people regarding peer pressure.
Especially when we're young, we're like sponges. We just pick up things everywhere. We want to learn, we want to grow, we want to find out new ideas. And unfortunately, a lot of times in the secular sphere, there's lots of different ideas and competing agendas, actually, not just educationally, but spiritually. And when all those get thrown in the pot, a lot of times the ones that have the loudest voice are the ones that win. And so, for example, with peer pressure, when it has to do with faith, peer pressure comes in probably the most when people are dealing with stereotypes. And unfortunately, a lot of times in our churches, faith, fighting for faith or trying to describe faith to someone who's shooting at you, direct problems. You're like, oh, maybe, I don't know. That's kind of what happens.
I think it depends on the group of young people.
Adam Rush is a Christian youth worker from Northern Ireland. He currently works in Bath at St Michael's Church, where we have decided to meet. Here, he manages a variety of young people's groups, whilst also finding time to run a number of side projects, including editing and producing the online magazine Communion Print. Like Skye, his working environment provides him with the perfect basis to contribute to any discussions concerning peer pressure, as well as other important issues.
I've come across kind of both. In my time doing youth work, I've come across situations where church and youth groups within church has been something that has been seen as cool and that something that people want to be involved in. And then I've also come across situations where it's just the worst thing that you could do. So I think it can have a cause, definitely. But in other situations, not so much. I think it's very, very dependent on the situation that you're in, really. For a lot of Christians, their main friendship group is other Christians. Certainly for a lot of Christians that have been in the church for maybe more than 3 or 4 years, they gradually become more and more surrounded by other believers. And what that does, I think, is it creates a bit of a partition between those who believe and those who don't believe.
As part of our wider research, we conducted a survey on the topics at hand. One factor which people often cited as being influential in their decision not to believe is that of religion being outdated. This widespread view facilitates disinterest towards religion, and so must be recognised as a contributory reason in need of further research. James Adicott is a PhD student at the Sociology Department at Cambridge University. His current research involves the use of precision agriculture, and this is James's personal passion. However, his expertise spreads widely, and he maintains a deep interest in the history of sociology. With this in mind, it is clear a good understanding of the fashionability of religion over time can be gleaned from James's knowledge. Therefore, it is natural for us to come together in Bath Abbey, first founded over 1300 years ago.
Some people would argue that church numbers, attendance is on the decline, but if you actually look at it, the church has gone nowhere. And perhaps in the future it might surface again. But if there was some event, perhaps, I don't know, a huge war or something, then what you could find is that actually people go back to religion. You know, if you're really pushed, I end up thinking in my head, oh God, help me, and it's just ingrained in the back of my head. And some people would argue it's deeply ingrained in our culture, and there's no escaping it.
I don't think the church is becoming outdated, but I think the church can become irrelevant. People will always ask questions about spirituality, about what happens when I die, what part does God play in my life today. But where the church can become really irrelevant is where we only have things to say. What the church needs to really focus on is more what we do, and perhaps that is a challenge for us.
It seems to me young people are approaching it differently from how they did 50 years ago. So 50 years ago, everyone went to church. I mean, it's kind of like you would be really embarrassed to say, I'm not a Christian. Now, I think they would find it embarrassing to say, I am a Christian. Even when I was growing up, but certainly the generation before that, but even when I was growing up, it was, you wouldn't really have said, I'm an atheist. That would have been kind of like, really, you know? And you were slightly embarrassed about not wanting to go to church. That's sort of make an excuse for why you didn't want to go. You didn't want to go because it was boring, but you didn't like to, but you felt slightly guilty about not wanting to go.
Yeah.
Whereas now, I think it's really embarrassing sometimes for people to say. People don't say it. People come on Alpha here and lie to their friends about what they're doing because they don't want to say that they're doing an Alpha course, that they're interested in Christianity. Yeah. So that's a big shift in the culture. It seems to me increasingly there's a stigma about it. The word Christian was a very good word. You know, people wanted to be Christian, even if they weren't Christian. It was oh, he's such a really Christian person. That was like, he's a really nice person. Now, he's a Christian, is like, it's like a sort of, that's like an insult. And that's such an interesting shift.
Many young people, I think, view religion as outdated. How do you respond to that view?
It is. It's totally outdated. Yeah. Religion is definitely outdated. I mean, look at where we're sitting.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I can't see many things in this building that are less than 100 years old, you know? When people critique Christianity and its relevance to our world today, they're generally right when it comes to saying it doesn't work, it doesn't fit. But what they're talking about is the things they see, I think, when they walk into a church building. You see this kind of stuff. It's like, this is old. But when you actually consider the teachings of Jesus and what he came here to do, what he came here to preach, what he came here to talk about, Jesus is very relevant. Rather than God and religion being stuck in a church with wooden pews that's empty 6 days a week and mostly empty on Sunday.
Yeah.
Instead of a God being there,
yeah,
he's a God who's present on Facebook. Maybe you look how popular Facebook is.
Yeah.
Dude, people are on that. But more Twitter now. Maybe it's Twitter. Yeah. I don't know. Facebook, Twitter, who knows? But that's all about relationship. People want to connect. Yeah. Well, Jesus wants to connect with us. And so if I can show people how there's a God out there who loves and cares about them, wants to connect, to be in relationship, that's something that most people haven't heard before, at least in this country, about God.
We tend to look at things in a very isolated, insular way. So we think UK 2014, how are things? Yeah. That's how things are. But actually, if you look longer term and globally, and first of all, if you look globally, the church is growing as rapidly, if not more rapidly than ever in history. The place where it's not growing is Western Europe, and we're part of that. So that's the sort of seeing it in just that. And then if you look at historically, people think church has been in decline like this. We're here now, so, we're going to disappear. Yeah. But actually it's not like that. Because if you go back to 1750, the church had practically died out. And then there was a revival, and now it's been going down again. So it's much more like this over the centuries. And so, okay, so where are we on that cycle? Maybe it's bottoming out. And maybe the fact that we've got all these vibrant young people in church means that it will start to grow again.
Clearly then, Nicky is optimistic about the chances the church has to flourish in the future, and internationally. But as he said, in Western Europe, this prediction doesn't fit statistical trends. According to YouGov, 57% of people don't think that the Church of England plays an important role in Britain. In November, John and I attended our school's debating society. When discussing the motion, should all religious education be banned in schools, these more secular views were extremely clear, although support for RE was maintained. Alom was keen to emphasise the difference between teaching about religion and teaching within religion. Do you think that all religious education should be banned in schools?
Absolutely not. I think religious education is incredibly important because religion plays such a big role in world affairs. It's shaped culture, literature and so forth, that children should be educated about it. And that's what's important, that they should be educated about religion, not in religion. We live in a time where there's lots of strife in the world that seems to be centered around religion. It's imperative that young people understand what people think about these matters and why. You know, one of the purposes of education is to help us to get along with other people, I suppose, to understand the world. And if huge swathes of the population view the world through a religious prism, then we ought to understand that prism.
Now, if a lot of contemporary religious education shoots to, or their goal is to throw out all kinds of different ideas about religion and say you can kind of choose from it, that's fine. But much of the time, those could be stereotypes. Could be just misinformation, actually.
Yep.
And a lot of it, as well as the way it's presented. My little brother had a teacher back in America who wasn't a Christian, and they were presenting ideas on Christianity, and he did everything he could to make the ideas of Christianity look ludicrous, while the ideas of Buddhism were held up on a pedestal. Now, if you're a good teacher, you try not to do that, but we're human, man. We mess up. I screw up all the time, and teachers are just the same. It's hard to hold back our biases.
Right.
So that's what's going to happen in any institution.
Okay. Do you think that chapel services, for example, at our school, do you think that general religious services at schools should be swiped away from the timetable?
Absolutely. I don't think religion should have any place in a school apart from in religious education lessons. I think schools should be secular institutions. I feel very strongly that young people should be given the opportunities to explore ways of making sense of the world for themselves, to arrive at their own conclusions about whether or not they are religious. And I think, like a lot of secularists, I think religion should be a private matter for the family. If people want to instruct their children in religious practice, they can do so in their own time. And school really should be about preparing young people for a world which is secular. I think it's not fair on young people to make them engage in religious practice. I think this is part of what I mean by religion having special privileges. We don't have any other kind of ideas which we thrust upon young people with the same force.
If the teachers of RE were being judged as successful if they made people believe in some kind of spirituality, then the odds are they're probably not doing a very good job. Religious education, because you're dealing with questions of why am I created, what am I doing here, is there a God and how does he relate to me or she relate to me?
Yeah.
It's a heart issue. It's heart. It's me. It goes to the very center of my soul and who I am. You can't do that in half-hour lesson. Yeah. Unless you're willing to open up quite a bit, and most people aren't. And most teachers aren't trained spiritually to do that kind of thing in multiple different religions. Culture in general just assumes it's just another add-on.
My journey so far has highlighted the modest importance of upbringing and peer pressure. Although our survey suggests neither are determining factors, our interviewees have noted their influence, Skye and Adam in particular. However, outdatedness with religion purportedly being more irrelevant to everyday life seemed to be of greater significance. Going forward, we still need to determine how it relates to other issues. Social media and the internet provides for communication, information and congregation. It also encourages individualism. Instagram, message forums and Facebook. More and more, we are seen as individuals, rather than part of a family, a religion, or a nation. Online, we can entirely and specifically choose what we want to associate with. In these ways, it could be argued prescriptive religious education is archaic, as it insults this individualism and choice when it seeks to convert or convince. Perhaps then, the rise of atheism is due to its allowance for individualism, something traditional faiths cannot provide to the same extent.
It kind of fulfills a kind of religious role in a way. There's lots of different ways you could argue this, but you could say that, with God there was a kind of feeling that he could see everything that you did in your life, and he was always judging you. You know, you're going to go to heaven or hell based on what you're doing. And with social media, you know, your friends, your work colleagues, your students, whoever, if they're in your network of people and you've had a photograph taken, perhaps you were out with your friends drunk in a pub, and it comes up on your social network, then you might feel a little bit less inclined to put yourself in situations where you might be judged by a crowd of people.
Where I think social media plays a role is in bringing together people from all around the world in communities that wouldn't otherwise exist. So I think there are huge atheist communities online which allow people who feel they have that in common with other people to gather in virtual communities. Similarly, those communities exist for religious people, and certainly recently with the rise of ISIS, we've seen the extent to which social media has played a role in allowing ISIS to reach people it probably wouldn't have in the past.
You can achieve a kind of sense of being in a collective. So I could be on holiday in Devon and there's a photograph taken of me, and I know I've got an audience of people that can see that photograph online. So there's that feeling of connectivity that is kind of substituted through these technologies. So some people could argue, or do argue quite convincingly, that these technologies fulfill kind of religious impulses that are very historic and very ancient.
I think the internet and social media has played a very powerful role in spreading atheism, or at least in allowing people to engage with other atheists around the world. For example, I was born in Bangladesh, and it's still a country where I think being openly atheist is problematic, certainly in particular parts of the country. However, the internet allows atheists in places like that to congregate, albeit in a virtual space.
As one of our survey respondents put it, increased access to the internet has given people the ability to research things easily for themselves. I believe such a free flow of information has made it easy for people to find evidence in opposition to their beliefs. The internet can provide for this discovery, in part by giving access to scientific information. In 1610, Galileo Galilei's proof of heliocentrism culminated with his trial and condemnation by the Roman Catholic Inquisition, and in 1616 it was declared that heliocentrism was heretical. Heliocentric books were banned, and Galileo was ordered to refrain from holding, teaching, or defending heliocentric ideas. Today, this series of events is often cited as an important turning point in the perceived conflict between science and the church. In our survey, 76% of under 25s who consider themselves to be atheists cited the religion-science conflict as having affected their decision not to believe in God.
Take agriculture, for example. People start to apply knowledge and science to the fields, and what they notice is that if they do that, they get more from nature. The Industrial Revolution, you have people really realizing that they can put science and knowledge into practice, and that will change society and the world around them. Through science and knowledge, we can then create a better world for humans on this world, rather than people believing that they spend life in this world, hoping to live a better life in the next world.
Absolutely.
That kind of rise of scientific thought, more than anything, I'd argue, has been detrimental to the kind of spirituality, and also perhaps arguably that has caused a decline in religion.
Science and faith, man, they go right together. They're just like, they're good together.
There shouldn't be a battle between faith and science.
Where I do think religion and science can come into conflict is in the minds of individuals who have been brought up to believe that their religion has scientific explanations for things like evolution and so forth, and that's really a matter of ignorance, I think.
Faith and science are dealing with different questions.
Faith is asking the questions of meaning and purpose. Science is asking the question of how.
Science can answer, or attempt to answer, when did this universe come into existence? You know, the Bible doesn't I think it's misreading the Bible to try and think that it's telling you when that happened.
If you're looking to religion to understand medicine or to understand global warming, then you probably need to have a rethink.
Faith answers the question, asks us, why are we here? Right. What are we supposed to do here? What's the goal of my life?
Science can't answer the question, how did it all begin? It can tell you what happened from the beginning, but it can't tell you what caused that beginning.
It's just two different questions, and it's great. In fact, I mean, hopefully Christians in science are able to hopefully discover some pretty amazing things.
So the fact that we have scientists doing excellent work who have made massive, valuable contributions to science and who also have a religious faith, to me, gives the lie to this issue that there has to be a conflict between science and religion. You only have to look at the recent news where the Pope has once again declared that evolution is the process whereby life on Earth evolved.
The best explanation at the moment is the evolution, and most people believe that, and that's probably right. But who knows? Somebody may come up with something different, and if the scientists come up with that, I would listen to the scientists.
The Big Bang Theory is the Catholic Church's accepted explanation for how the universe evolved. So there is no conflict between religion and science when it comes to grown-up religious people accepting science as the best method we have for explaining how the universe works, the kind of material world, if you like.
If they say the universe is X billion years old, I'll believe them. It's X billion years old. I won't try and work it out from Genesis how old it is. But if they try and tell me that they know that there is no God from their science, then I think they're outside their sphere of... I don't think they can say that. Yeah. Because they don't know that. There's no... their science is unable to prove or disprove whether there's a God.
Clearly, there are lots of important factors which make atheism an appealing alternative to having a faith. As Nicky explained, in his youth, being a Christian was much more the norm. Statistically, this isn't the case anymore. Our question is why? From my interviews with Skye and Alum, it seems that religion has now become just another add-on to life, rather than playing the integral role that it once did. With the advent of social media and the internet, religion has been placed on a level playing field with other competing ideas. But this isn't exclusive to an online context. Secular RE lessons have facilitated the same thing for many years. Because of this, as a society, we are trained more than ever to discern within this information overload, to decide between ideas we consider relevant and those we consider irrelevant. However, it seems that many, if not most of us, still have a spiritual yearning, which, as James suggested, may well be deeply ingrained in our society. The Church needs to prove that it is part of this relevant group, as well as continuing to provide for this spiritual yearning. New atheism has been able to seem like it is part of this relevant group by aligning itself with an intellectual identity. With the astounding scientific progress made since the Industrial Revolution, science has been able to assert itself as a proper way and a real way to improve our lives. As long as new atheism can align itself with science, it will continue to grow. It is no wonder then that Nicky and Skye have been keen to emphasise the compatibility of science and religion. In my view, the arguments for atheism are much more convincing, but I often question myself about whether this is just because of cultural and peer pressure. Regardless, new atheism is on the rise. For me, making this documentary has revealed massive nuances within the subject. Often, there is not nearly as much conflict as is widely perceived. All of the Christians I've met have been totally realistic about their faith. The way I see it, science is based on self-critique. The Church must do the same to survive. Only time will tell if it can do this.